Abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are not high crimes or misdemeanors, bribery, or treason. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the Democrats' quest to impeach President Donald Trump, which I believe is doomed to failure, and the fact that they're not even citing a crime in their articles of impeachment that would otherwise be necessary to impeach any president under Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution, which states, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors." That's Article 2, Section 4. And yet the articles of impeachment that the Democrats have brought against President Donald Trump, H-Res 755, and resolution impeaching President Trump. Article 1 is abuse of power, and Article 2 is obstruction of Congress. Problem: neither of those things are crimes under the federal or state codes. So you have to articulate a violation of law to have an article of impeachment, and they're not citing crimes. The abuse of power, that has to do with President Trump temporarily delaying military assistance to Ukraine while they considered the new administration there under President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the corruption that's rampant in Ukraine, and whether or not they're a reliable partner on those grounds. And also from a national security perspective, the civil war in Ukraine has been ongoing since 2014, with Western factions backing Kiev, and then Russian factions backing these breakaway provinces in Crimea and eastern Ukraine that basically could be an incident for a wider regional war involving Europe, Russia, or the United States, and that would be catastrophic, and I think it's something to be avoided. So considering, well, gee, does military assistance to Ukraine serve U.S. national security objectives? Do we need to engage in diplomacy? These are questions that I think with the election of Zelensky in April, that was overwhelming. He got over 70% of the vote, created a new opportunity potentially to pursue alternative strategies. And U.S. military assistance to Ukraine is something that President Trump has been critical of. It's something that not even former President Barack Obama wanted to do. And so the decision to delay there, I think, is well within the scope of President's Article 2 powers. And then there is the question of investigating Burisma, the natural gas firm, and Trump saying, you should take a second look at Burisma to Zelensky in his July 25 phone call, because the prosecutor got fired at Joe Biden's behest under Poroshenko, your predecessor, Zelensky. And it just so happened that Biden's son was serving on the board of directors of Burisma at the time that Victor Shokin, the prosecutor, was fired. And according to Shokin, this was to protect, the reason he was fired was to protect Burisma from being prosecuted. And then Joe Biden's admitting on camera to the Council of Foreign Relations that he had Shokin fired. So I think that that's a legitimate avenue for investigation, frankly, because it looks really, really corrupt. And Trump's trying to say, look, we're not trying to shoot down any legitimate investigations on your part. If you want to look at Burisma, take another look at Burisma. And Burisma's been under investigation for years and years for corruption because the head of the company was an energy minister under Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych, the removed president of Ukraine from 2014, that ended up causing a civil war in Ukraine when people were upset that Yanukovych had been removed, and the people of Crimea and the eastern provinces are saying, we're going to leave Ukraine, we're joining Russia now. And so there's basically a really good reason to look at this Burisma company. They were dishing out energy contracts and natural gas exploration contracts to themselves, whilst the head of the Burisma company was the energy minister there. So there's reasons to look at it. We're not certain why the investigation was truly shut down. And so Ukraine, they can go ahead and they can look at Burisma. There's nothing wrong with Trump suggesting what was already public information to Zelensky, that Biden had been bragging about getting the prosecutor removed. And besides that, nobody can produce a single witness, the Democrats in Congress, that President Trump either ordered or was seen communicating to Ukraine that the military assistance will not come unless these investigations are happening. Not a single eyewitness. Nobody's testified with direct knowledge to that in front of the House of Representatives. So now they're making the accusation, despite that, without evidence, that Trump was leveraging military and security assistance to Ukraine in exchange for these investigations. One of the witnesses says that he presumed that the military assistance was being leveraged when he spoke to a Ukrainian official in early September, but he says that he was only presuming that the aid was being leveraged. And so, but when he spoke to President Trump about the matter, Trump said, no, there's no quid pro quo. So that all the witness testimony so far has been exculpatory, and no one has any direct evidence of the allegations. What a shock. But even if it had been the arrangements, let's say Trump was leveraging the military assistance, that wouldn't be a crime either under the federal code. And so these are things that President Trump has the power to do. One, reconsider military assistance to Ukraine, and two, to order investigations or to urge Ukraine to cooperate in an investigation that would tell us whether or not they're too corrupt to provide military assistance to. Ukraine had it alleged, in addition to local potential violations by Burisma, that U.S. laws against money laundering might have been violated as well. The U.S. and Ukraine, we have a mutual legal assistance treaty, and so there would be a basis for investigating crimes that were broken in both countries. If there are U.S. persons who are potentially implicated in violations of U.S. law, it would be appropriate for Ukrainian law enforcement officials to provide that information to the Justice Department, which, by the way, was what they were trying to do even before Zelensky was even elected. So there couldn't have been a corrupt quid pro quo for trying to get information to the United States that Ukrainian prosecutors have been attempting to get to the United States since 2018. But Zelensky wasn't elected until April of 2019. So Trump can't be in a time machine going back in time to try to tell Zelensky before he's elected to do this, to send this information to Attorney General William Barr, because he hadn't even been elected yet. Now, Democrats who profess that no one is above the law, their principal argument against investigating the Bidens is that there's a Republican office. Well, President Trump, he'll benefit if Ukraine investigates Biden, or Hunter Biden or Burisma. It'll make Biden look bad. Therefore, Biden is above the law if there's a Republican in office. That's the essence of their argument. But the interest of justice and the rule of law are not suspended in election years, even for Democrats, believe it or not. Whether an investigation of Burisma is legitimate rises or falls on its merits on the conduct of the company alone, not what long-standing political players who were hired to shield their inquiries. Such matters are settled in courts of law, whether here in Ukraine, as the case may be. Congress has no power to settle such a dispute, and certainly not on concocted impeachment charges for non-crimes. Second, laughable obstruction of Congress charge is connected with senior White House officials and administration officials who provided advice to President Trump, refusing to testify before the impeachment panels. But that's not a crime either. What's that dispute here, frankly, is executive privilege, and that is the doctrine that executive branch officials who provide advice to the president don't have to testify, generally speaking, pointing to the need for confidentiality, particularly in matters pertaining to military and diplomatic secrecy, as well as matters of executive consideration that would basically, where national interest would be better served by keeping that information private. Normally, such disputes over the extent of Congress's subpoena power, what they tend to do, they're settled in federal court, and that you don't need to have an impeachment to get the officials to testify. You just go to federal court and say, we're subpoenaing in this witness, and the courts will say, well, that's covered under executive privilege, or no, that's not covered under executive privilege. And so they could do that, and Congress can't settle that on its own. They don't adjudicate the legitimacy of their own subpoena power, just like President Trump doesn't ultimately determine what does and does not constitute executive privilege. because both of those are implied powers under Article 1, the subpoena power, the power to investigate for legislative purposes, and Article 2, executive privilege, the need to keep the deliberations of the executive branch private and confidential. Those are implied powers on Article 1 and Article 2, and when there's a dispute between the two, it's supposed to go to the Article 3 federal courts to arbitrate that dispute. Now, therefore, exerting executive privilege is not a crime, no more so than Congress's subpoena power, neither of which are articulated in the Constitution. When there is a disagreement over whether a document or a witness can be subpoenaed by Congress, the proper form is to take it to federal court. Now, Gerald Ford, he once famously said that high crimes and misdemeanors are, quote, whatever a majority of the House of Representatives considers them to be at that moment in history. And yet that's not what the framers had in mind at all. In fact, they anticipated that a president being impeached for a crime would then be prosecuted after leaving office. We know that from Federalist No. 69 by Alexander Hamilton outlining impeachment. And he wrote of the impeachment provision of the Constitution that, quote, the President of the United States would be liable to be impeached, tried, and upon conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors removed from office, and would afterwards be liable to prosecution in punishment in the ordinary course of law, meaning if it is not conduct that is punishable in a court of law, under law, then it cannot be punishable by impeachment either, constitutionally. When the Justice Department, on behalf of the President, brings prosecutions against defendants, it must always articulate what crime has been committed. Warrants cannot issue but upon probable cause under the Fourth Amendment. Every person is entitled to trial by jury and the right to an adequate defense, and the right to confront accusers and to call witnesses, and these are all protected in the Bill of Rights under the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Sixth Amendments. The Fifth Amendment's got due process, yet almost none of these protections are being applied in the Democrats' impeachment inquisition. No crime has been articulated under federal law. The articles of impeachment are for non-crimes, abuse of power, and obstruction of Congress. And the obstruction could be very easily rectified by just going to federal court and saying, we think we have the power to subpoena this witness. Go try it out in court, see if you win. Records, including phone records of the president's attorneys, members of Congress, and even a journalist, were subpoenaed and granted without any judicial order or warrant and any showing of probable cause. The president was not allowed to call any witnesses in the House proceedings, having any legal counsel present to ask questions, and the primary accuser was never even called to testify, and his name is being kept anonymous under dubious legal grounds. So it's no wonder that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says there's zero chance that President Trump will be removed from office. The Democrats haven't made their case. Quote, the case is so darn weak coming from the House. We know how it's going to end. There's no chance the president's going to be removed from office. So Democrats, they're wasting the entire country's time and basically just sacrificing this entire session of Congress to pursue BS, bogus impeachment charges against President Trump for non-crimes. That's not even removable from office. This is the first impeachment in history, and I'll leave you with the close here, of a sitting president either to lack any crime being articulated as having been broken or any due process. Democrats expect Republicans to join with them in a bipartisan undertaking that would be necessary to overturn the results of the 2016 election and remove the president from office when there is no crime, no basis under the Constitution for doing so. Don't hold your breath. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.